Good morning. So now we're going to dive into the real deal. So buckle up, because we're going to talk in the real deal in the sense of the techie part, right, of the summit. Not that the other one wasn't the real deal, because I think patient engagement is the way to get quickly treatments to the market. So what I would like to do is first ask my esteemed colleagues to introduce themselves. Maybe Dr. Stevenson, you want to start?
Yes, thank you. I hate to ask this question, but is this on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, thank you for that. My name is Mike Stevenson. I work for Alexion Pharmaceuticals, who is the manufacturer of selumetinib or Koselugo. My responsibility is the U.S. Head of Medical Affairs for Koselugo, as well as a few other products within the rare disease portfolio. And if I could just take 30 seconds and tell a very quick story. I've been in pharma for about 25 years now, but the last 10 years I've spent in rare disease. And what really moved me over from the bigger disease states, the depression, the schizophrenia, the multiple sclerosis, to rare disease was that I was fortunate to have a job provided in about 10 years ago. And the third day on that job, I had the opportunity to sit around an advocacy group where we were having a patient advisory board. And one of the questions that came up was, if we could make a drug to address aspects of your disease, what would you want that drug to do? And we had one of the patients look at me with tears in his eyes, and he would say, "Take my pain away." And from that moment, it became personal. I was working for a person. I was not working for a data point. And that made all of the difference in the world. I've worked 10 years, as I said, in rare disease. I will remain the rest of my career focused on rare disease.
Cool. Dr. Yohay, you are the walking personification of this commitment to NF. So can you introduce yourself, please?
I've never been described that way, but thank you. My name's Kaleb Yohay. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I've been taking care of people with NF for about 22 years, and have run NF clinics for my entire career. And I see adults and kids with NF1, NF2, schwannomatosis, and have been very involved with clinical trials for a big stretch of that time. Also involved, just for the purpose of today's discussion, one of my other hats is I'm the chair of the Programmatic Review Committee at the Department of Defense Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program for NF, which is a mouthful, but it's a pretty large source of funding for research for NF1, NF2, and schwannomatosis. And I'll tell a brief story to sort of similar vein. The people sometimes ask me how I got involved in NF in the first place, and similarly, I was a resident at Johns Hopkins, and a mom who had 2 kids with NF2 came to see me for the first time, and her daughter had gotten really, unfortunately, care that was not really aligned with the best kind of outcomes that could have been achieved. And her mom was so frustrated with the care that she'd gotten and the lack of education amongst healthcare providers. I'm going to shorten this story down very much and also clean up the language, but she basically insisted that I become an expert in NF2 so that I could help her children navigate NF2. And so that has lasted through my career.
Thank you, thank you. So when I said the real deal, of course I didn't mean that this was the only real deal, right? I was extremely inspired by Annette, the opening speaker. Then Emily has done an amazing job in getting the CTF Engage program off. But what I meant is that I need to click myself. Okay. So what I wanted to show you quickly is, this is a complicated area. And as you hear from my weird accent, I'm not an American native speaker. And I think a lot of the things that we're doing in research is using acronyms. And it's sometimes really frustrating that you're sitting there and you're like, what? So I thought to quickly throw the acronyms on a screen. We thought that that would be a good idea to give you an idea of what it is that we're actually going to talk about. So the first one is IND, Investigational New Drug Application. You will see that on Dr. Stevenson's slide. And that is, in fact, the entire data package that you have to prepare so that the FDA can say, yes, you can go to the clinic, yes or no. So remember, IND. The next one is, as Dr. Yohay already said, the mouthful. It's an incredibly potent program called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. And I know that there is a lot of people here in the room that go every year to the Hill, as well as we go, to try to make sure that the money that NF-CDMRP is investing is secured every year. And as you know or not know, but this year we have obtained, I think 10 days ago, the $25 million again for NF research for the upcoming year. And that is an applause to all of you, to all the advocates in the room that make that happen. The third one is Intuit, and that is a trial that Dr. Yohay is going to talk about, and I will also explain a little bit later what this platform trial is. But it is let's just think it is a creative trial. It's a creative way of thinking about clinical trials specifically for NF2. The fourth one is GCAR, which stands for Global Coalition for Adaptive Research. And one of the things that we at CTF have been pretty good at is not to try to do everything ourselves and to say, is there a good organization out there that is not yet focusing on NF, but we would like them to start focusing on NF. So we're on the hunt for smart cookies, honestly. And like Dr. Pepper, who just spoke on Emily's panel, is to find people that know something we don't know and that we can bring them into the field. Preclinical studies is another one. It's everything that needs to happen before you can start dosing a patient. All the information, whether it is on cells or in animals, or just making sure that the drugs that go to the patients are safe and hopefully efficacious. And then the last one is a collaboration that we have with a really powerful group. Is RAINS, stands for Response Evaluation in NF and Schwannomatosis. And that group is a voluntary group. People are putting in a lot of voluntary time, both clinical caregivers and patients, to think about how a good clinical trial should look. What kind of endpoints? What does success look like in a clinical trial? So now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Stevenson to talk about what the clinical trial looks like.
My pleasure. Thank you for that. How do we advance here? Did you advance?
I think, yeah.
Sorry about that.
This is the thing, yeah.
There we are.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for joining this. I am very honored to be part of this presentation to speak about something that I'm quite passionate about. And so the topic today is patient engagement, despite Emily's dislike of that phrase. Patient engagement, or more specifically, the patient voice within the drug development process. So I'm going to talk a bit about the drug development process from start to finish, some of the steps that go along the way, and then that will really kind of lay the foundation for our discussion as we chat, ask some questions, and talk about where the patient voice is really critical to inform the best outcome or the best clinical trial. Now, what I'd like to do really is to get some terminology straight, and that is, I know there's the word pipeline, right, is tossed around a lot, and you may hear the word pipeline used quite frequently. When I think pipeline, I think about a big tube like the Alaskan pipeline that takes oil from point A to point B. That's not what we're referring, right? Pharmaceutical industry has taken some liberties in the English language to turn that word into what means essentially drugs that are either in development or ideas for development. So if you go to a pharmaceutical website, you click on something that says pipeline, what you'll see, and I'm going to do this in kind of mirror reverse, you'll see on the left-hand side all of the drugs, drug candidates, I should say, and then the disease states for which they are being explored. And then on the top, you'll see the phases of the clinical studies, very similar to what you see on the slide here. Then there'll be arrows that go across for each of the drugs to talk about where they are within this clinical process. So with that as kind of a backdrop, let's dive in. I want to start with what I call the preclinical or the IND enabling, but there's a step that really comes before that. It's drug discovery. It's the lab work that goes into identifying molecules that will modify activity in various biological processes or symptoms associated with the disease. Let me give you a couple of examples. Right? Let's say that there is a molecule or a disease state where there is overactivity of a biological process, the overgrowth of cells, for example, resulting in tumor, either cancerous or benign. Or there's a disease state that may result from underactivity in certain areas that may cause diseases such as depression. In this case over here, you want to develop a drug or a molecule which can mitigate, which can bring down, curtail the activity that's associated with that disease. And over here, you want to bring up some of those transmitters in the brain that are associated or causative factors for that particular disease. So with that in mind, the drug development process begins with identifying some of those molecules. As those molecules are defined, it then goes into the preclinical stage. Annette did a great job at really defining exactly what that was. This is testing the candidate molecules, 3, 4, 5 of them, in cells as well as in animal models as well, to determine if they are hitting their target. That is, if they are effective to the extent that one can judge effectiveness within an animal model, but more importantly, if they are safe, right? Is there some unexpected toxicity or poison about that drug that would preclude its testing within the human population? So once it goes through the preclinical piece, a package is submitted called the IND, the investigational new drug. It's submitted to FDA. FDA has 30 days to respond if there's any objection associated with that. If not, then that means that the drug is free to move into the clinic, into phase 1. So as we think about all of these phases, phase 1 to phase 3, we can think about it in the context of scientific questions that are being asked of a particular drug. Each phase has different questions that are being asked, with the hopes that at the end you get a series of questions asked or answered that are going to be informative to the various communities, the patients, the clinicians, the regulators, that will enable a new drug and potential approval by the Food and Drug Administration. So with that said, phase 1 is generally a smaller study that's done. I put about 10 to 20 patients here. This is rare disease that we're talking about. The main purpose of phase 1 here is safety and dose ranging. So what do I mean by that? Again, to determine exactly what the safety profile looks like in the human body, as well as to evaluate doses, 10 milligrams, 20, 30, 50, 100, to determine exactly what's called the maximum tolerated dose. This helps to define specifically what dose range we don't need to go above, but we can feel fairly confident in moving to the next stage and testing for the effectiveness. One other thing that's noted here in phase 1 study is to identify how a drug is absorbed. Let's say there's a tablet. The tablet is taken. Is it absorbed? How it's absorbed through the stomach into the rest of the body, how it's being distributed, and then what the body does to the drug, how it's eliminated, and through what systems. So let's say it's successful there. We move into phase 2. Phase 2 is in the patient population. In the case that we talked about here, say a cancer. In the case we talked about here, say a depression. Here is where safety is further characterized in the patient population, but we also ask the question, does this work? Does this do what we intended it to do? And if so, to what extent? And is there a particular dose or doses that work better than others? So if we have success in phase 2, then we move on to phase 3. Phase 3, as you'll note, has a larger population. It is the same patient population for which we are seeking indication, but it is to see if phase 2 can then be replicated in a larger number of patients with the targeted disease. So here, some of the questions that are being asked are very similar to phase 2. You may see some additional questions that are being asked with respect to quality of life, pain, activities of daily living, or other ones that are identified through the community and through the clinical trial design. Now, as we take all of this information, including preclinical information, toxicology, all the way through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, we then assemble that, we submit it to the Food and Drug Administration in a package called an NDA, or a new drug application. The FDA then takes in the information and they review it. Generally, a review time is anywhere to from 6 to 12 months. It can be longer than 12 months. It's rarely shorter than 6 months, and 6 months is only for a priority review in a disease state that has an area of high unmet need. So FDA can at this point give one of 3 answers. They can say, yes, your drug is good, it is safe, it is deemed effective, you are free to go out and market this and commercialize this and make it available to the general public. They can say, no, we don't think your drug is safe or effective. Or they can say, we want to see some more information. We want another analysis that's done. Or we have a concern about this safety issue. Or we want further longitudinal or long-term data. They may send it back just for a reanalysis, or they may send it back and ask the company to do another study. The responsibility of FDA is to make sure that they are assessing safety and efficacy so that people are protected and people have a good course to evaluate benefit risk in all the drugs that are approved by FDA. So to do all of this, folks, it takes a village, right? Or the theme of this meeting is, it takes a team. On that team are the sponsors, right? The clinicians, the physicians that are the investigators, and of course the patients. So maybe to speak to the clinician perspective, Kaleb or Dr. Yohay, I can hand it over to you to talk a little bit about participation in a clinical trial.
Sure. Thank you. Any questions about the pipeline and sort of that concept first?
Yeah, great.
Is the 6 months to a year more, that's really just the amount of time it actually takes is shorter. It's just based on their backlog, based on their capacity to analyze, or are they truly analyzing?
No, they are truly analyzing it.
From that whole 6 months, 12 months, is analysis happening?
The amount of data that is submitted is comprehensive. It can fill trucks. Well, now it's a digital age, so it fills zip drives. But nonetheless, it is a very comprehensive and very complicated overview and review. And again, I think what they're looking at is through the lens of patient safety and efficacy to first establish that risk-benefit calculus and to make sure that they're recommending approving drugs that they feel confident are good for public consumption. Another question I saw.
Yes, thank you. I was just curious, you were describing how the FDA may come back and ask questions about safety and efficacy and so forth. Is it possible to get the FDA involved earlier on and partnering so that if they see a red flag, they can identify it immediately instead of having to wait until the end of the process?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. One of the things is the FDA consultation with the FDA can happen, should happen before an IND is submitted, right? What the orphan drug designation often does as well is that it offers an opportunity to have those discussions with the FDA along the pathway. And at any time during clinical trials, the sponsor, the company, can always request a meeting with FDA to talk about some endpoints or to talk about some of the signals that they may be seeing to seek some guidance.
And maybe just in general, the FDA has become way more collaborative. Before it was, send us your package and we will let you know. And now it is more, tell us your story. And also listening, this FDA listening session that Emily was mentioning, the FDA really wants an interaction with the community and understanding what they're doing. So it's way more tell your story than send us your data.
Question back here, yes. I love these questions.
Hi, it's really helpful to understand the process. I was curious, once it's approved and you're given the green light to market, to go to market, how do you, it's an economics question, how do you set prices for these drugs? How do you develop fair market value? How does it get sorted out, like which drugs get these patient assistance programs? You need insurance to get on board to prove that they're gonna pay for these drugs. That's a whole nother pipeline, I assume. How does that work?
So the setting the prices, it's a really good question. It is outside my realm of expertise, but I will give some thoughts, right? So our commitment, we want to ensure that the drugs that we have at Alexion are available in some way, shape, or form. We have a number of teams that are currently working on talking with individuals, the patient education managers, some of the case studies, some of the case managers that can work with individuals and insurance companies if there are problems with prior authorizations that are needed or securing coverage for that drug for patients that are in need of that. In terms of the price setting, I'm afraid I can't speak to that. I saw another question over here.
We'll do one last question and then we'll move on.
How does the pipeline for FDA compare to how other countries create and study new drugs?
So very similar. So I've done some work in Europe. This is with the EMEA, which used to be in the UK before Brexit. At any rate, so they will evaluate a drug. It does take them a little bit longer. So generally, you can think about the EMEA or Europe approving a drug over the course of the year. There is that big approval, but then recognizing that there are 28 or 29 countries that have the opportunity to approve the drug or consider the drug for their approval within their respective country. It's not the United States of Europe. Right? So there is that level of complexity and individuality across those different countries. But the EMA process for review is generally about a year.
So maybe, if you guys are okay, I would like to move over to Dr. Yohay to kind of ask, could you, as a clinician now, really talk about, okay, how does that work? How does a patient get enrolled? What is his role, her role?
Yeah. So first, I would ask, is there anyone here that has been actively involved and actually participated as in a trial for our treatment? How many people? Yeah, so maybe 10% of the room. That's great, and I really see clinical research as a partnership. Obviously the community is looking for new therapies, new treatments, and clinical trials are one way, obviously, to get that out to everybody. It's also a way to sort of get in early sometimes and get access to a potential therapy before it's generally available. And that can be very appealing because a lot of times we're in a place where we don't have generally accepted or available treatments for particular aspects of NF. But I will say, being in a clinical trial, and probably the people that have raised their hands can speak to this, it's hard work. It takes a lot of time. It frequently takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of support from your family, from your social network to get you to the appointments, to be there. And it really is a commitment, both on the part of the clinical team that's running the clinical trial as well as the patient and the family. Just by way of example, we've been doing, and we can talk about this more later, but clinical trials for NF2 as part of this group called Intuit. And we've been testing a couple of different drugs along the way. And you first asked, well, how do people get involved? How do they get enrolled in a clinical trial? Some of that is random happenstance, and some of that is active participation from people looking for clinical trials, and the third way is clinicians actively looking for trials for their patients. So if there's a trial like this Intuit trial for NF2, that gets published in clinicaltrials.gov, which is a resource that everyone has access to that lists all the open clinical trials in the country. And you can type in NF1, you can type in NF2, you can type in plexiform neurofibroma, whatever symptom that you particularly are interested in thinking about. And it'll generate a long list of not very digestible information, but it can give you a starting point. So that's something you can take to your own clinic and say, hey, I was wondering about this or that. Is this something that's relevant for me? And that's one way to sort of get your foot in the door. The other is if you happen to have a symptom that happens to match a clinical trial, the clinical trial people are also looking for people that might be a very small number of people that have that particular symptom or that particular issue that is being addressed by the clinical trial. And so the other way happens as well, where clinicians and clinical trialists will look for patients by asking around or by talking to the different sites that are in the trial and try to find those patients to actively reach out to them and ask them to be in the trial. And sometimes it's just you show up at clinic, you describe what's happening, and hey, we just opened up a clinical trial, and you might be a good match for that. And that happens a lot as well.
Can I add one quick thing? So I just wanted to talk for 1 second about the NF registry. So the NF registry is really a contact registry. So if you sign up for the NF registry, and if you say, I have plexiform neurofibromas, you will, from us, get an email, because the CTF team will be able to send you emails and say, there is these clinical trials that are open for plexiform. Please go talk to your Dr. Yohay about it and say, could I be eligible for this clinical trial, yes or no? Because some of the clinicians are really informed about what is happening in clinical trials. Some are not that informed. And having you the power of saying, I have seen this, would I be eligible, sometimes informs the clinicians also of the clinical trials that are open, because there are many now. There's about 60 open, so it's not 2.
Right, and I'm sorry not to plug the registry.
No, no, we're together, right? We're 2 brains, we think more than one.
Yeah. And then sort of the next step is then, if you think that a trial might be something that is appropriate for your particular situation, the clinical trial site then has to go through a very detailed checklist of eligibility. So every trial is designed with a long list of things that need to be met before someone can be deemed to be actually able to enroll in a trial. Because we're trying to ask and answer a very specific set of questions. This is sometimes one of the frustrations of clinical trials. They get pretty narrow sometimes, right? We're, a drug that we think might help NF in general, for clinical trials, it has to be designed so that we can actually find a signal, which means that we have to ask very specific questions, like, is there a X% change in a tumor over X amount of time? And that tumor has to have been growing beforehand in a certain way over a certain amount of time, and we have to have X number of scans. So there's a whole bunch of different sort of check boxes that you have to go through to see if someone can actually enroll in a trial. And then actually to the question that was asked earlier that by the father of that baby right there, how do you engage kids or younger patients in clinical trials? Because, especially for like the optic pathway gliomas, a lot of the trials that are happening in younger kids, you are engaging kids in what can be a risky and time-intensive and difficult process, and you are making that decision for them. We try to have as many conversations. By age 11, you have to have assent in addition to consent. So if you want to be in a trial, you have to consent to it. For kids who are younger, you get assent. They can't sign legally that say they want to do the trial. But you have to engage the child in understanding the trial as best you can to their to their age and in a developmentally appropriate way. And that can be tough. And it's probably not, it's a conversation for another day, but there are many ways to get kids engaged in the NF community and understanding NF. And that's a good thing to talk to your clinic about. So If a patient is enrolled in a clinical trial, they've met all the eligibility criteria, there's a lot of data collected along the way to see not just the outcome of the treatment, but also what the side effects are, whether or not you're taking the medication, so a drug diary. You often have to take the drug at very specific times. You often have to get scans on a very rigid schedule. You often have to get blood work done on a very rigid schedule. So this is all stuff that needs to get mapped out and planned at the very beginning, because if someone enrolls in a clinical trial and then decides, oh, actually this is really hard, I can't do it, that's a spot in the trial that then the information actually gets lost. And so again, it really is a partnership. We ask patients to be in clinical trials, and we are asking a lot of them to do that. But we also ask that patients sort of try to be honest with themselves and with us. Is this something that I can really do? Because it is such a big commitment.
So Dr. Yohay, just to give people an idea, what is the typical time frame that people would have to sign up for a clinical trial? I know they're not all equal, but kind of what would you say as?
Yeah. So first off, not all trials are drug trials. There are other trials, but for today's talk, I think we're really focusing on drug trials. Often they're 1 or 2 years of commitment where you're going to be followed with regular scans. That schedule of scans and labs and evaluations is usually more frequent at the beginning and then spaces out over the course of the trial. But it can be really frequent, every 2 weeks, every week, every 3 weeks, every month for a while, and then space out to every 2 months, then every 3 months, then every 6 months. But it's a lot.
Are there any questions for the room around this specific topic?
Who funds the tests, the procedures, the doctor's appointments, stuff like that? Is that grant funded, or does that funding come from somewhere else?
So there you go. The
Yeah.
DoD is, I think, a fantastic.
Yeah.
The CDMRP. So Dr. Yohay is the chair of the CDMRP committee, the review committee. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the.
Yeah, it's actually a really great question and a complicated one to answer, because the money comes from very many, from a lot of different sources. So from a research standpoint, there's the NF Clinical Trial Consortium, which is funded by the DoD, which gives money to support infrastructure for clinical trials across the country for NF. That's one way the money gets into clinical trials. Another is from pharmaceutical companies who may give money to support the trial or may just give their drug for free for the clinical trial. Sometimes a lot of the studies that we're getting are not covered by the grants that support the clinical trial. So clinical trials are incredibly expensive. MRIs are very expensive. The reality is that a lot of what we try to do in designing clinical trials is match as much of that up to what would normally be done in the normal course of taking care of somebody with NF, so that insurance actually pays for the scans or pays for the blood work and is not necessarily paid for by the grants that support the trial. And then there are grants from CTF, grants from the Department of Defense, grants from the NIH that will also support, so each investigator would apply and try to get money to support that particular grant.
And I just want to throw one rose to the clinical community. You guys have no idea how much volunteer time our clinicians are putting in these clinical trials to make sure that they're run well, that the patients are taken care of well, and that these drug trials can happen. So I just want to make sure that you recognize that, and let's send some love to our. No, it's true. I mean, you guys put in an enormous amount of free time. Any other questions?
I'm going to have us move on to the next topic. We have 10 minutes left in the session.
Okay, cool. So, okay. So what I wanted to quickly show you guys is what we're actually doing at CTF and who you can contact for which opportunity. I don't know if this. So first of all, we see our role to help. And this is almost like military term, is we want to deploy both our talent, our time, and our treasure, which is our funding, to bringing discoveries to the clinic. That is our obsession. And how do we want to do that? We want to partner and connect with everybody. We want to help advocate, and we are also investing, as you have heard yesterday. So first of all, our first role is, can we help identify potential treatments that can go to the clinic and that can help our patients? So here on the left upper corner, I'm worried if I push something that, no, I'm not going to do it. On the left upper corner, you see those two little heads. That is Marco Nievo and Bridget Garalik. So he is the CSO, and Bridget is the Chief Medical Officer. CSO is Chief Scientific Officer. Bridget is the Chief Medical Officer. So they together lead a team, a very talented team, as you see all the little heads under that, to make sure that treatments are identified and make it to the clinic. Then Vidya Browder on the right side, Vidya Browder, Sarah Lise, and Angela are working to make sure that we help discover these new mechanisms, right? What are we going to have that drug do? Let's first understand the biology and understand what is happening. And we do this by giving out funding, by organizing the conference, which is going to be in June in Brussels, little thing. And we're doing that also in very close partnership and communication with the research community, because we're looking also at the literature, what has been published all over the world that we could maybe use for treatments. The next part is then Marco dives into some drug databases that we have access to. They're like, databases that contain all the drugs that today are either in preclinical, so now everybody knows what that means, or are in clinical development in other places in the world. And then we go back to the clinical community and say, hey, is there anything of this that you think we should be thinking about to bring to NF patients? Once we have that agreement also with the clinical community, we then have Irene, who is here next to number 3. She is the director of preclinical initiatives. And what she is building is, in collaboration with the community and with the NF experts, almost a virtual hub, which means that she will create some kind of public-private partnership so that if companies come to us or we have a drug that could be tested for NF, we can say, this one has a cell model, this one has an animal model, this one has a pig model, this one has data libraries, blah, blah, blah. So we're becoming that one-stop shop for the community. And then the last one is, when it comes up at the moment of treatments, we have Heather and Leder, who are next door, or were next door, running the clinical session. Together with Bridget, they're kind of helping, how can we deploy, again, our time, talent, and treasure to make sure that we help the clinical trials. Where are we now? This target scan, which is that drug database, right? You have a mechanism and you have a drug that is in place. Irene is expanding the preclinical hub. We already have quite some interactions with the preclinical community, but we are expanding that. The platform trial that Dr. Yohay is going to talk about, and I'm going to be fast. And then the last one is the Clinical Trials Consortium, where we really also want to make sure that we're helping. Why is this important? In the preclinical hub, as I said, I always tell companies, we've set the table for you. Everything is on the table. You bring us your drugs and your money, and that will do everything for you. The agreements are in place. Marco is diligently negotiating something that is fair for both the academic labs and the industry. So we do not only love industry, we do not only love academia, we love everybody who can help us solve this and get rid of this monster called NF. And then the last one is, we have a very good advisory committee that are experts in NF, so people that really know these models in and out. And we have a very nice group of experts that help us develop and make sure that we select in our little virtual hub the right assays, the right selection systems. So to talk 1 second about this idea, and then I would like Dr. Yohay to talk specifically about that INTUIT trial. So if you look at a traditional clinical trial, the trial that also Dr. Stevenson was talking about, is that you have to consider that for every drug, you have to start from scratch. It's like building a house, right? So you have for drug A, you build a house. You design the trial, you recruit the clinicians, you recruit the patients. So it's like everything has to be started from zero. The trial ends, the whole house is gone. You have to build a new house for the next drug. This platform basket trial is in fact a very creative way of saying we're not building a new house for every drug. We build one house and we rent out rooms to the companies. So which means that now we have the house, and the house is into it, and Dr. Yohay can talk about that. We have the rooms, but the pharmaceutical companies have to share the kitchen, which is the longitudinal natural history study, which is the patient community that is so that we can potentially even never have to give the placebo, which is normally the arm that is not getting the drug. That information, the companies have to share. And that's scary for some companies. I'm looking at you. I hope you're not scared by that. Because I think in the rare disease community, that is the only way we will be able to efficiently find trials and find drug treatments for the patients. And why is that efficient? Because you, patients, are part of the design. You help us decide what matters to you. And that is built into that, what they call master protocol, right? Consider that the big house. Then the agreements are in place. All the sites, specifically for Intuit, all the sites have already agreed to participate. So you don't have to travel for every molecule to one site. There is 6 or 7 sites now that are collaborating for Intuit. And then the master protocol, our chief medical officer is helping out there. And now let's consider that we're building this one house and we're renting out the rooms. And it would be unfair not to mention the entire team, because as I say, teamwork makes the dream work. So, Dr. Yohay, could you talk a little bit specifically about that?
In 3 minutes.
2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Go.
Okay. So clinical trials, like Annette was just saying, not really very efficient. But under the leadership of Scott Plotkin, we've created something called the Intuit trial, which basically enrolls people with NF2. And this could be done for NF1 or schwannomatosis as well, but this is for NF2. People with NF2 enroll not for a specific drug, but to be part of this platform. And then different drugs get added to this platform, and they can be offered to the patients that have enrolled and say, you know, there's this new drug that's come along, we're going to try this drug, and patients can then get randomized or assigned to different medications as they come along. The other, and I think really important piece that we haven't touched on yet, is that it's also what's called the basket trial. So it's a platform trial, everyone enrolls, and then different drugs come along and they can use different drugs. But as you know, with NF, there's not one single symptom or one single issue that anybody has. Everyone has multiple issues, and in general, clinical trials are poorly designed to look at, you know, yes, we're treating a brain tumor, but what happens to your cutaneous neurofibromas? We don't do a good job of that. This type of trial tries to address that. It's called a basket trial, so you can get enrolled in this particular trial for all of the different types of tumors. So you could get enrolled because you have a growing vestibular schwannoma, or you could get enrolled because you have a meningioma, but you're also going to have other tumors measured along the way and assessed at the end of the trial. And I think this would be very powerful for something like NF1, where if someone's getting a treatment for plexiform neurofibroma, let's see what happens with the scoliosis, and that adds to the power of the trial. So I think so far this has been a very successful strategy with NF2, and I think it's I hope it paves the way for similar types of strategies for NF1 and schwannomatosis. So.
Yeah, and so we have so there is a trial that was designed in Europe for an NF1 platform trial, and we're going to implement that together with this Global Coalition for Adaptive Research. And then if we can make this happen properly and it works out, because it's a complex infrastructure, right? We have to build this entire apartment now, and later it's really easy, but the apartment construction is a little bit of work. So we'll be building the apartment for NF1 and schwannomatosis as well.
Thank you guys. We are actually at time. So
9 seconds.
Thank you all. Thank you, Annette.